What happens when a man has everything? A billion-dollar company, a trophy mistress, and a quiet, unassuming wife he thinks is nothing more than furniture. Julian Thorne was that man. He stood at the top of New York, ready to accept the Innovator of the Year award. And he chose that night, in front of everyone, to publicly humiliate his wife, Amelia, for his mistress. He thought Amelia was weak. He thought she was a nobody. He never bothered to ask who her family was. He's about to find out. Because her father just arrived. And he's not just any father, he's a king. Julian Thorne didn't just live in New York, he owned it. Or so he believed. His company, Thorne Dynamics, was the darling of Wall Street, a titan of robotics and AI that had catapulted him from a moderately wealthy background into the stratosphere of the ultra-rich. His face was on Wired, Forbes, and Time. He was, in his own mind, the architect of the future. And every architect needs a quiet, well-decorated home. That, to Julian, was Amelia. Amelia Thorne, née Duval, was a ghost in his penthouse. She was beautiful in a way that was easy to overlook. Soft, classical features, large grey eyes, and a quiet demeanour that Julian had initially found refreshing. He'd met her at a low-key diplomatic mixer. She'd been introduced as Amelia Duval, an art history post-grad from a good family in Europe. Julian, ever the predator, saw her as the perfect acquisition. Beautiful, well-bred, quiet, and, he assumed, pliable. He needed a wife to complete the picture of the stable, respectable mogul. She was perfect. Their 3-year marriage had been a slow-motion erosion of her presence. Julian's voice was the only one that mattered. "Amelia, the benefit on Thursday," he'd call out, not looking up from his phone as he strode through their cavernous, marble-floored foyer. "You'll be seated at table 14, with the lesser donors. I need you to just smile. Don't try to talk about whatever it is you talk about. Art? Flowers? Just smile." "Of course, Julian," she would say, her voice barely a murmur. "And that dress you wore last week, the green one, burn it. It made you look provincial. Wear the black one, the one Isabella picked out for you." Isabella. The name hung in the air between them, sharp and toxic. Isabella Vance was Julian's COO. She was everything Amelia was not, sharp, loud, dressed in blade-like silhouettes of Bottega Veneta and Tom Ford. She was a shark, and she was, as everyone in their circle knew, Julian's mistress. Amelia's days were spent in a gilded cage. She managed the household, she attended the charities Julian forgot he was a patron of, and she spoke often on the phone in quiet, rapid German. "Who are you always chattering to?" Julian had asked once, impatiently. "My family. Julian. Just my father." Right. The old Money Vineyard crowd. "Tell your papa I'm too busy for a visit this quarter." "Maybe next year," he scoffed, already texting Isabella. What Julian didn't see was what Amelia was doing when he was gone. He mistook her silence for emptiness. He mistook her stillness for stupidity. He never noticed that the art history books on her desk were actually dense volumes on international finance law. He never saw that the charity she was managing was a complex network of anonymous grants to shell-shocked tech startups, the very ones he was trying to put out of business. He never noticed that when she spoke to her Papa in German, her voice changed. The soft, hesitant murmur was gone, replaced by a crisp, authoritative tone that gave precise, complex instructions. "The assets are under-leveraged," she said quietly into her phone one afternoon, looking out over Central Park. "Thorne Dynamics is running on ego. He's exposed. He thinks his Q4 projections are a secret. I've read the full brief. He's about to acquire CyberLux, but he's using his personal shares as collateral, leveraged against the primary trust. A deep, accented voice replied on the other end. "And the woman? Vance?" Amelia's eyes hardened. "She is a liability he insists on promoting. She's sloppy. She's feeding him data that confirms his own bias. They're preparing for the Innovator of the Year gala on Friday. He sees it as his coronation. The board in Altenberg is growing impatient, Liebling." "I know, Papa," Amelia said. "But I needed to be sure. I gave him every chance to be a man of character. He has failed. Friday. It ends on Friday. Let him have his stage. It will make the lesson that much more permanent." She hung up just as Julian burst through the door, energized and cruel. "Amy, God, you're still in that robe? It's noon. Listen, Friday is the big night, the Innovator of the Year award. It's mine. The press will be everywhere. I need you to look presentable, but stay in the background. This is my night. Isabella will be at my main table, of course. Business. You understand. You won't." He didn't wait for a reply. He was already heading to his study, pulling Isabella's name up on his phone, a predatory grin on his face. Amelia stood by the window, watching the city below. "Yes, Julian," she whispered to the empty room. "I understand perfectly." Isabella Vance was a creature of Julian's own making. She had clawed her way up from a mid-level marketing position to chief operating officer by mirroring his own ruthlessness. She saw Julian not just as a lover, but as a vehicle. And she saw Amelia as a roadblock, a flimsy, pathetic one, but a roadblock nonetheless. Her favorite game was casual, public humiliation, always masked as help. A week before the gala, Isabella had insisted on a team dinner at Maria, a restaurant so exclusive it breathed its own refined air. Julian, of course, had brought Amelia, seating her between himself and Isabella. "Oh, Amelia, honey," Isabella had said, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she placed her hand over Amelia's. "That's a fish fork. You're having the fillet. Sweetie, you must be so stressed, planning all those flower arrangements." The table of VPs and board members chuckled lightly. Julian just smirked, entertained. "She's a country girl at heart, Isa. You can't blame her." Amelia had simply smiled, retrieved the correct fork and said, "You're right, Isabella. My mind is elsewhere. I was just calculating the debt-to-equity ratio of the new acquisition. It seems ambitious." The table went silent. Julian's face darkened. Isabella's smile faltered. "Don't be ridiculous, Amelia," Julian snapped. "She reads a headline and thinks she's a banker. Eat your steak." The subject was dropped, but Isabella had seen a flicker of something in Amelia's eyes. A dangerous spark. She resolved to crush it. Her next attack was more direct. 2 days before the gala, Amelia had done the one thing she never did. She visited Julian's office. She came bearing a peace offering, a framed photograph from the early days of their marriage, a rare moment of genuine smiles on a trip to the coast. She thought, perhaps, one last time, she could appeal to the man she had once believed him to be. She stepped out of the private elevator onto the 70th floor executive wing. The entire floor was open-plan glass and steel, culminating in Julian's corner office. He was in there, but his back was to the door. He was with Isabella, and they weren't talking business. Amelia stopped, hidden by a large concrete pillar. Julian had Isabella pressed against the floor-to-ceiling window, his hands possessively on her waist. "He's giving me the award," Julian was saying, his voice thick. "The mayor himself." "And after?" Isabella purred, tracing the lapel of his suit. "After you win." "What about the mouse? It's getting embarrassing, Jay. She's a drag on your brand." I know," Julian sighed, pulling back. But the divorce, it's complicated. Her family, they're weird, old world, connected somehow. It's not the right time. Then make it the right time, Isabella hissed, or I will. I want to be the one on your arm, Jay. Not that pale, useless ghost. Prove it to me. On Friday, prove to everyone that I am your partner, that I am the one who built this with you. Issa, don't prove it, or I walk, and I take the Cyberlux integration plans with me. Amelia didn't need to hear any more. She saw the calculation in Julian's eyes. He would choose the path of least resistance, the path to his own glory. Quietly, Amelia stepped back into the elevator. She looked at the photograph in her hands, the two smiling people on the beach. She let it slip from her grasp. When the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, she walked out, leaving the shattered glass and the smiling memory behind on the cold marble floor. When Julian arrived home that night, Amelia was in the library, reading. "You didn't come by the office," he said, accusingly. "No, Julian, I got held up. I trust your meeting with Isabella was productive?" He narrowed his eyes, searching for sarcasm, but her face was a perfect, placid mask. "It was. We're finalizing the gala speech." He tossed a velvet box onto the table in front of her. "This. Wear this. And the black dress. And for God's sake, do something with your hair. Look alive." Amelia opened the box. Inside was a necklace, a stunning, gaudy cascade of diamonds. It was loud, expensive, and completely tasteless. It was Isabella's style. "It's beautiful, Julian," Amelia said, her voice soft as silk. "I'll wear it with pride." He grunted, satisfied. He had placated his wife, secured his COO, and his award was waiting. Julian Thorne was in complete control. The Plaza Ballroom was drowning in opulence. A sea of black ties and couture gowns shimmered under the light of 1,000 crystal chandeliers. This was the Innovator of the Year Gala, the absolute apex of New York's tech and finance society. And tonight, it was Julian Thorne's coronation. Amelia stood beside him on the red carpet, the garish diamond necklace feeling like a lead weight on her collarbone. The black dress was, as he'd demanded, elegant but forgettable. "Julian! Julian!" The cameras flashed, a wall of blinding light. "Julian, over here! Who are you wearing?" "Tom Ford," Julian boomed, flashing his perfect predatory smile. He wrapped his arm tightly around Amelia's waist, pulling her into his side like an accessory. "And this, of S-Course, is my wonderful wife, Amelia." "Amelia! What are you wearing?" a reporter shouted. Amelia opened her mouth, but Julian cut her off. "She's wearing my diamonds," he laughed, tapping the necklace. "What else matters?" The reporters laughed with him. Amelia smiled, a pale, tight expression that didn't reach her eyes. Inside, the ballroom was buzzing. Julian, in his element, dragged Amelia from group to group, a king holding court. He introduced her not by her name, but by her function. "This is my wife, Amelia. She keeps the home fires burning, eh? Senator, lovely to see you. You know my wife, Amelia. She's my wife." Then, Isabella Vance made her entrance. She was in a liquid silver gown that seemed poured onto her body, her black hair slicked back. She didn't walk. She stalked. The room's energy shifted to her. She bypassed the receiving line and walked directly to Julian, placing a possessive kiss on his cheek. "Julian, darling, you look incredible," she purred, ignoring Amelia completely. "Isa, you made it." Julian's voice was warm in a way Amelia hadn't heard in years. "You look dynamic." "I am dynamic," Isabella whispered, loud enough for Amelia to hear. "We need to talk. The Cyberlux deal. There's a rumor of a new bidder, a big one. We need to close tonight." Julian's smile tightened. Who? Who's bidding? I don't know. The name is locked down. Altenberg Global. Ever heard of it? Amelia's hand, resting on her champagne glass, didn't even tremble. No, Julian snapped. Never. They're nobodies. A holding company. I'll crush them. He turned, suddenly aware of Amelia, and his irritation found its target. Amelia, go. Get me another drink, and get one for Isabella. Amelia looked at him. Julian, there's waitstaff everywhere. Don't argue with me, he hissed, his fingers digging into her arm. Just be useful for once. Go. It was a test, a public declaration for Isabella's benefit. He was proving who held the power, the cluster of people around them. CEOs, politicians, journalists, all saw it. They saw the mouse being sent on an errand. Amelia's gaze was unreadable. She nodded. Of course, Julian. Isabella. What would you like? Champagne, the good stuff? Not whatever you're drinking. Isabella smirked. Amelia turned and walked toward the bar, but she didn't get 5 feet. Julian, in a grand gesture to make a point to the senator beside him, swung his arm out and, accidentally, backhanded her, sending her full flute of champagne cascading down the front of her black dress. The music stuttered, a collective gasp. Oh, God, Julian said, his voice a performance of exasperation. Amelia, really? Clumsy, clumsy, clumsy. You've ruined the dress, and you're soaked. Isabella let out a high, cruel laugh. Oh, mouse, you really can't take her anywhere. Amelia stood there, champagne dripping from her hair and the gaudy necklace. The room was spinning, all eyes on her. The humiliation was total. Julian, his face a mask of annoyance, didn't offer a napkin. He didn't help. He looked at her, soaked and small, and made his choice. Honestly, Amelia, he said, his voice cold and loud, why don't you just go? Go home. Fix yourself. You're making a scene. This is a professional event. He turned his back on her. He put his arm around Isabella's silver-clad waist. Isabella, come. I want you to meet Senator Davies. He understands innovation. He walked away, leaving his wife standing alone in the center of the room, a spectacle of public disgrace. Amelia stood perfectly still for 10 seconds. The whispers were deafening. She looked at Julian's back. She looked at Isabella, who glanced over her shoulder, a look of triumphant venom on her face. Amelia didn't cry. She didn't run. She turned, her back straight as a rod, and walked calmly. Not toward the exit, but toward a quiet alcove by the ballroom's service entrance. She pulled out her phone. The uniformed security guard at the door, hired by the venue, moved to stop her. Mum, service only. He stopped when 2 men, dressed in impossibly sharp, dark suits with earpieces, materialized from the shadows. They flanked the alcove, their eyes scanning the room. The venue guard blinked, confused, and stepped back. Amelia hit a single number on her speed dial. Papa, she said, her voice no longer the whisper of Amy, but the clear, cold command of Amelia. It's done. Julian Thorne felt the air change the moment Amelia was gone. The brief, awkward silence was filled by his own booming laugh. My apologies, everyone. A small domestic spill. Now, as I was saying about the future of automated logistics, he was high on the adrenaline of the confrontation. He had done it. He had put the mouse in her place and anointed his queen, all in one move. Isabella was radiant beside him, her hand now resting possessively on his lower back. They were the power couple, the real power couple. An hour later, the moment arrived. The lights dimmed, a drum roll. The MC, a famous news anchor, took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the moment we've all been waiting for, the Innovator of the Year award. This year, the choice was unanimous. This man hasn't just changed the market, he has created it. From a small garage startup to a global powerhouse, please welcome the CEO of Thorne Dynamics, the innovator of the year, Julian Thorne. The room erupted in applause. Julian kissed Isabella, a full, public kiss that left no room for interpretation. He strode onto the stage, his arms raised in victory. He was a Roman emperor. "Thank you, thank you," he beamed, accepting the heavy crystal award. "Thank you. What a night." He gripped the podium, his knuckles white. "They say innovation is a lonely road. They're wrong. You cannot build the future alone. You need a partner." His eyes found Isabella in the front row. "You need someone who sees the world the way you do. Someone who isn't afraid to take risks, to be ruthless, to cut away the dead weight that holds you back." The crowd murmured, sensing the drama. This was better than an awards show. It was a public execution of his marriage. "I built Thorne Dynamics from nothing. But I had help. I had a partner who was there in the trenches with me, not at home, arranging flowers." A few people laughed, nervously. "A partner who understands that to win, you have to be willing to burn the old world down. So I want to share this award tonight with my true partner, my inspiration, my COO, Isabella Vance. Isa, stand up. Let them see you." Isabella stood, tears in her eyes, blowing him a kiss. It was the ultimate fuck you to the departed Amelia. Julian was about to continue, to launch into his Q&A about the Cyberlux acquisition, when the MC's voice cut in, suddenly tinny and confused. Mr. Thorne, apologies, I'm just getting word." "What is it?" Julian snapped, annoyed by the interruption. We have a surprise guest, a keynote speaker who was delayed at the airport. He has requested to say a few words before the Q&A. Julian was furious. "A surprise speaker? Now? Who is it? Bill Gates? Elon? I wasn't briefed on this." "No, sir," the MC said, his face pale as he read the card just handed to him. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, a warm welcome for our distinguished patron and surprise keynote, His Serene Highness, Grand Duke Leopold of Altenburg." A ripple of confusion went through the new money crowd. Who? But in the back of the room, Senator Davies, the governor, and the two members of the Rockefeller family who were present. They all stood up. Instantly, Julian and Isabella stared, perplexed, as a man moved from the same alcove Amelia had disappeared into. He was in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair and a military straight posture. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored navy suit, but he moved with an aura of absolute, ancestral power. This was not a man who asked for respect. He was respect. He was flanked by the same two serious-looking men who had guarded Amelia. They weren't security. They were sentinels. "Altenburg," Isabella whispered, her face ashen. "As in, Altenburg Global." Julian's blood ran cold. The Grand Duke walked onto the stage. He did not shake Julian's hand. He did not acknowledge the award. He walked straight to the podium, and the MC, a man famous for grilling world leaders, simply handed him the microphone and stepped back. Leopold of Altenburg looked out at the glittering crowd, his blue eyes like ice chips. "Good evening." His voice was a low, cultured rumble, accented and amplified, silencing the entire ballroom. "I am Leopold." He turned his head slightly and looked, for the first time, at Julian Thorne. "A fascinating speech. Mr. Thorne." The silence in the ballroom was no longer polite. It was heavy and absolute. Julian Thorne, who had commanded this room moments before, was now a statue, a prop on his own stage. Grand Duke Leopold surveyed the crowd. His gaze was that of a man who owned the building, the city, and quite possibly the air they were breathing. "I am here tonight for 2 reasons," Leopold began, his voice calm and lethal. "The first is as a patron of true innovation. My family's holding company, the Altenburg Global Initiative, has long believed in funding the future. We believe in integrity, in honor, in character." He let the word character hang in the air, a deliberate indictment. "We have been, quietly, observing the American tech sector, looking for a new flagship investment, a new division to build upon. We look for vision, but we also look for stability." Julian, sensing an opportunity, stepped forward, his arrogant smirk re-emerging. "Your Serene Highness, Julian Thorne, CEO of Thorne Dynamics. Perhaps we could—" Leopold raised one hand, palm out. Not a large gesture, but it stopped Julian as effectively as a brick wall. "I am aware of who you are, Mr. Thorne," the Duke said, his voice dropping a degree. "I am also aware of Miss Vance." Isabella, who had been preening, froze. "The Altenburg Global Initiative," Leopold continued, turning back to the stunned audience, "is a $500 billion strategic fund. We do not bid on companies. We acquire them. We are, as of 9:01 p.m. this evening, the new majority partner in the Cyberlux venture." Julian's world tilted. "What? That's impossible. My deal was closing tonight." "Your deal," Leopold said, "was a leveraged buyout using personal assets. The board of Cyberlux preferred cash. My cash." You, Julian was sputtering. Isabella looked like she was going to be sick. The company, their prize, the thing she had used to blackmail him, was gone, snatched from under them. "But that is not the main reason I am here," the Grand Duke said, his tone shifting from corporate raider to something far more personal. "I am here as a father." A confused murmur. "My family. We are from a small, quiet part of Europe. We do not broadcast our presence. We believe in the old ways, that a person's worth is in their actions, not their title. My daughter felt the same. She is a woman of formidable intellect, with degrees in finance from LSE and law from Yale. But she worried. She worried that the world would only see her title, that men would only want her for her name." Julian's face was a mask of confusion. He didn't understand. "So, 3 years ago," Leopold said, his eyes finding a spot at the back of the room, "she made a request to live a normal life, to come to America with a different name, her mother's name, Duval, to see if she could find a partner who would love her. Amelia Duval. Not the person she truly is. She wanted, as she said, to see the wolves in their natural habitat." Julian stopped breathing. Amelia. Duval. Her mother's name. German. Papa. Old family. Weird. Connected. "Oh my God," Isabella whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Leopold's eyes bored into Julian's. She met a man she thought was a builder, a visionary. She respected his drive. She fell in love with him. She gave him her loyalty, her trust, her capital. Julian staggered back, his hand grabbing the podium for support. "Capital? What capital? She has nothing. She has everything, you fool!" Leopold's voice was suddenly a roar, the aristocratic calm shattered, revealing the fury of a lion. "Her provincial family trust, which you so arrogantly dismissed in your pre-nuptial agreement, is the primary silent investor in Thorne Dynamics. My daughter's pocket money funded your entire Series B." The ballroom was in chaos. People were standing, phones out. This was a hostile takeover. It was a soap opera. It was the end of Julian Thorne. My daughter is a quiet person. She is kind. She is forgiving. I told her you were a viper. She wanted to see the good in you. But a man who would belittle his wife, a man who would publicly humiliate the mother of his unborn child. A new collective, horrified gasp. Julian, white as a sheet, looked into the crowd. Unborn. No, she's not. She is, Leopold said, his voice shaking with a rage that was terrifying to behold. And you, boy, you shoved her. In front of them. The Duke turned. But my daughter is not just a kind woman. She is the heir to Altenburg. And she has a new title. He gestured to the back of the ballroom. For too long, the Altenburg Initiative has been managed by committee. It is time for a single, focused vision. I am here tonight, as my final act as chairman, to announce the new global CEO of the $500 billion Altenburg Global Initiative. Please welcome my daughter, Her Serene Highness, Princess Amelia of Altenburg. The world stopped. All eyes snapped from the stage to the back of the room. The alcove. The double doors of the service entrance swung open, pushed by the two sentinel-like guards, and Amelia walked out. But it was not Amy. It was not the mouse. She had shed the stained, cheap-looking black dress. She was now wearing what was beneath it, a stunning, simple, impossibly elegant gown of deep sapphire blue. Her hair, which had been damp and stringy, was now pinned up in a severe, regal chignon. The gaudy diamond necklace from Julian was gone. In its place was a simple, single, perfect strand of pearls. She was no longer slouched. Her back was straight. Her chin was high. She didn't look like a wife. She looked like a queen. She walked through the center of the ballroom, the crowd parting for her like the Red Sea. The whispers were a hurricane. It's her? A princess? He was cheating on a princess. He had no idea. Julian's legs gave out. He physically stumbled, grabbing the podium. Amelia! He whimpered. The name was a question, a plea. Isabella Vance was completely and totally frozen. Her entire life, her career, her win over the mouse. It all just evaporated. The woman she'd tormented was not just old money. She was ancient money. She was titled money. Amelia ascended the steps to the stage. She didn't look at Julian. She didn't look at Isabella. She walked directly to her father, who kissed her on both cheeks. "Well done, Liebling," he murmured. "Thank you for coming, Papa," she replied, her voice crisp and clear. He handed her the microphone. She turned to the crowd. Her eyes were not the soft, grey puddles Julian knew. They were chips of slate. "Good evening," she said. Her voice, no longer hesitant, filled the room. It was the same authoritative tone she used on the phone. "My father is, as usual, a bit too dramatic." A light chuckle from the crowd. She had them. "I am Amelia. For 3 years I have been observing. I came to this country to learn, and I have learned a great deal." She finally turned her head and looked at Julian. He was a broken man. "Amy, please, I didn't know. I'm sorry. I love you, Amelia held up a hand. He stopped talking. "You love power, Julian," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "You loved what you thought I was, a weak, controllable asset. You thought my family's provincial trust was some quaint vineyard in Germany. You signed a pre-nuptial agreement you drafted, an agreement designed to protect your assets from me." She smiled, a thin, sharp, terrible smile. "I cannot thank you enough for that. Your lawyers were adequate, but mine, the ones who reviewed it from Geneva, were better. You see, the agreement you signed so protectively also contained a clause, a morals clause, that in the event of public infidelity and humiliation, all shared assets, and any assets derived from joint investments, revert to the wronged party. Julian's face went from white to green. Joint investments? What? We have no joint investments. My company is mine. Is it? Amelia said, turning back to the audience. Let's review. My personal trust, the Duval Trust, made a Series B investment of $150 million. That investment gave me, us, a 62% controlling stake in Thorn Dynamics. You were so eager for the cash, you never bothered to do your due diligence on Amelia Duval. You thought I was just your wife. She looked at Isabella. And you, Miss Vance. You were correct. The Cyberlux deal was critical, which is why I bought it. The Altenberg Global Initiative's new technology wing will be absorbing its assets. And of course, its talent. My husband's company, however, is redundant. She turned back to Julian. His Innovator of the Year award had slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the stage. As the majority stakeholder of Thorn Dynamics, Amelia announced, I am calling an emergency board meeting, effective 9 a.m. tomorrow. My first motion will be to remove Julian Thorn as CEO on the grounds of gross negligence, fiduciary mismanagement, and a violation of the morals clause. You can't, Julian shrieked. I can, Amelia said. And I will. My second motion will be to dissolve the company. Its valuable assets, the engineers, the patents I funded, will be absorbed into the AGI. Its liabilities, her eyes swept over Julian and Isabella, will be liquidated. She looked at Julian, a man who was now, officially, worth nothing. You wanted my stage, Julian, Isabella had said. This is my night. Amelia leaned into the microphone. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Father, shall we go? She handed the mic back to the stunned MC. She, her father, and her security detail walked off the stage, leaving Julian Thorn and Isabella Vance in the ruins of their lives, illuminated by 1,000 flashing camera phones. The aftermath was not a news story. It was a detonation. By the time Julian and Isabella stumbled off the stage, they were pariahs. The guests, the senators, the bankers, the CEOs avoided their gaze. A wall of press surged forward, but not for Julian. They swarmed Amelia. Princess Amelia, a comment. When did you plan this? How much is Thorn Dynamics worth? Amelia didn't slow down. She and her father, flanked by their security, moved through the chaos like a battleship through water. Julian, wait! Julian cried out, running after them. Amelia, please! Our baby! You can't do this! I love you! Amy! Amelia stopped at the ballroom doors. She turned, and the entire room held its breath. She looked at him, this screaming, pathetic man. You did not love Amy. You despised her. You belittled her. You humiliated her. And you put your hands on her while she was carrying your child. The princess doesn't forgive that. But Amy does. Then it's okay, he sobbed, grasping. No, Amelia said, her voice flat. It means Amy is giving you a mercy Amy would. The princess would have you jailed for fraud. The princess would have Ms. Vance sued for corporate espionage. Amy is just taking her company back, and she is filing for divorce. Goodbye, Julian. She turned and walked out the door. The next 48 hours were a blur of legal and financial obliteration. Julian's corporate credit cards were declined before he even got home. The locks on the penthouse had been changed. His key to the private elevator no longer worked. He was, quite literally, left on the street in his tuxedo. The 9 a.m. board meeting was a 10-minute conference call. Amelia, phoning in from a private jet, stated her case. The remaining board members who had seen their stock options evaporate due to Julian's recklessness and were now facing a $500 billion titan voted unanimously. Julian Thorne was removed. Isabella Vance was fired, with a clause for moral turpitude. The press was relentless. "Princess Incognito," screamed the New York Post. "The Wolf of Wall Street meets a real lioness." Forbes ran a detailed breakdown. How Julian Thorne's ego lost him $1 billion empire and a $500 billion heiress. Julian's life was over. He was a laughing stock. The prenup, which he had his high-priced lawyers review, was ironclad. He had insisted on the clauses. He had insisted she keep her little family money separate. And she had. That little family money had just swallowed him whole. Isabella fared no better. She was the other woman in the biggest scandal of the decade. She was blacklisted. No firm would touch her. Her plans for the Cyberlux integration were useless, as Amelia's AGI team had a better, more robust plan already in motion. Isabella had been played, not just by Amelia, an opponent she never saw, but by Julian, a man she'd overestimated. Julian tried to fight. He lawyered up, but his lawyers were met by a team from Geneva. They didn't just have documents, they had everything. They had every text message he'd ever sent Isabella on a company phone. They had the financial reports Amelia had been reading in the library. Reports that proved Julian had been cooking the books for his Q4 projections, a fact he'd hidden from the board, but not from his quiet wife. He was facing not just divorce, but federal fraud charges. 6 months had passed since the night of the gala. 6 months since the Plaza Reckoning, as the press had gleefully dubbed it. The world had moved on, as it always does, but the orbits of the 3 central figures had been irrevocably and violently altered. For Julian Thorne, life was no longer a penthouse view. It was a second-floor, beige-carpeted, 2-bedroom apartment in a sprawling, characterless complex in Fort Lee, New Jersey. The view over the Hudson was still there, but it was a bitter, distant caricature of the God's eye view he had once commanded. He sat at a cheap IKEA desk, a high-end microphone, a relic from his old life, plugged into an aging laptop. The rest of the room was sparse, furnished with the few items the Geneva lawyers hadn't deemed derived from joint assets. A broken, glued-back-together Innovator of the Year award sat on his bookshelf, a monument to his own stupidity. He was recording. "And that's the real danger, people," he said, his voice, once a booming instrument of command, now thin and reedy, trying to project a charisma it no longer possessed. "It's the hidden enemy, the person you trust, the one who smiles while they slip the knife in. They call it female empowerment. I call it a hostile takeover." He paused for effect, staring at the sound wave on his screen. "This is The Phoenix Project, Episode 12. I'm Julian Thorne, and I'm here to tell you how to rise from the ashes of a strategic character assassination." His podcast had, as of that morning, 14 subscribers. 12 of them, he suspected, were bots. He was a joke, a punchline at the very cocktail parties he had once hosted. The settlement hadn't just taken his company, his homes, and his art. It had taken his name. Thorne was no longer a brand. It was a cautionary tale. The fraud charges had been dangled over his head, a guillotine held by a silken thread. To avoid federal prison, he had signed everything away. His prenup, the one he had been so proud of, had been the very document that disemboweled him. The morals clause, the Duval Trust clause. It was all there. He had signed his own execution warrant. A sharp rap on his apartment door made him jump. It was the mailman, looking annoyed, with a certified letter. Julian signed for it. It was from a law firm in Geneva. His hands, no longer steady, fumbled with the thick cardstock. It wasn't a new threat. It was a conclusion. The dissolution of your marriage to Amelia Duval Altenberg is hereby finalized by the Canton of Geneva. It was done. He sank onto his cheap sofa, the letter in his hand. He tried to summon the rage, the fire he'd once had, but all he felt was a vast, hollow, cold. He had lost. He hadn't just been outplayed. He had been playing a different, smaller game all along. He tried to call Isabella. He had tried, in the first few weeks, to find her, to team up, to something. But her number had been disconnected. Her email bounced. She had vanished. He was, for the first time in his life, completely and utterly alone. He looked at his laptop. "The Dangers of Female Ambition," he muttered, trying out a new title. He had learned nothing. Isabella Vance, now known as Isa Martin, stepped off a city bus in a drizzle, shielding her hair with a copy of the Chicago Tribune. She walked into a grey, brutalist office building, swiping a simple plastic keycard. She was a content strategist for a mid-level regional insurance provider. Her life was no longer Tom Ford, Maria, and private jets. It was Ann Taylor Loft, a packed lunch in a Tupperware container, and a cubicle that smelled faintly of burnt coffee. She had been blacklisted, erased. The moral turpitude clause in her firing meant she'd received no severance. The scandal had made her unemployable in any high finance or tech circle. She was toxic. She was the mistress who had helped humiliate a princess. It was a brand she couldn't escape. So she'd done what she'd always done. She adapted. She was a shark, and she would survive, even in this small, muddy pond. She sat at her desk, booting up the old Dell computer. Her 26-year-old manager, a man named Kyle with an unfortunate soul patch, walked by. "Big day, Isa," he chirped. "The Q3 analytics for the bumper-to-bumper campaign are in. Try to make the PowerPoint look snappy this time." "You got it, Kyle," she said, her smile a rigor mortis grimace. As she worked, collating mind-numbing data, her eyes drifted to a magazine on her colleague's desk. It was the new issue of Time. The cover was a painting, a regal, severe, and beautiful portrait. Amelia, not in a gown, but in a severe, modern boardroom suit. Her hair was pulled back. Her gaze was direct, intelligent, and utterly uncompromising. Her pregnancy was visible, a subtle but unmistakable symbol of her power. The headline, "The Princess CEO." How Amelia Altenberg is redefining global power. Isabella stared at it. She felt a familiar, hot bile rise in her throat. But it wasn't just anger. It was something else. A cold, sharp, and painful respect. She had misjudged. She had seen Amelia as a mouse, a soft obstacle to be removed. She had never, not once, considered that Amelia was a lioness in repose, that the entire marriage, the submissive wife act, was a 3-year-long due diligence. Amelia hadn't been a victim. She had been a scout. "She played us," Isabella whispered to herself. "She played us all." She saw it now. Amelia hadn't just won. She had set the board, chosen the pieces, and dictated the rules of engagement. The gala wasn't a humiliation, it was a trigger. A carefully planned casus belli. Isabella looked at her PowerPoint. Bumper to bumper. She had been Julian's COO. She had been on the verge of everything. And now she was here. She hadn't just been a liability he'd cast aside. She'd been a pawn in Amelia's game, a useful, predictable fool. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and opened a new slide. Q3 Analytics. She would survive. She would claw her way back. It would take a decade, but she would do it. And this time she would never, ever underestimate the quiet ones. The boardroom was silent, floating 40 stories above Lake Geneva. The snow-capped peak of Mont Blanc was visible in the distance. At the head of the 40-foot glass table sat Amelia of Altenburg. She was 8 months pregnant, and she was, unequivocally, in charge. The Altenburg Global Initiative, the $500 billion sleeping giant of a fund, was now awake, and it was hungry. The projections for the new AGI US Innovation Hub are acceptable, Amelia said, her voice quiet, but echoing in the perfect acoustics. The dozen VPs, grizzled veterans of finance and tech, leaned in. But acceptable is not why we are here. She turned to a man at her right, a man in his 50s with the bright, nervous eyes of a genius. Dr. Aris, she said, you were the head of R&D at Thorne Dynamics, my predecessors. Notes said your research into quantum dot energy storage was academically interesting, but commercially unviable. He cut your funding. Dr. Aris swallowed, nodding. He did? Julian. He wanted a new app. Something for the shareholders. He said my work was too slow, too expensive. Amelia nodded, tapping her stylus on the screen. He was wrong. I read your original thesis, the one you published before you joined his company. It is the single most brilliant piece of material science I have read in a decade. The doctor looked stunned. Julian Thorne wanted to build a brand, Amelia said, her eyes sweeping the table. We are here to build the future. Dr. Aris, the AGI is giving your lab a new, unlimited budget. I want a working prototype in 18 months. I am liquidating, as my predecessor would say, the division that was working on his social media app. You will have their entire staff. Can you do it? Dr. Aris, a man who had been belittled and sidelined for 3 years, looked at his new CEO. He saw not a princess, but a visionary. Yes, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, Your Highness. Yes, I can. Good, Amelia said. And please, call me Amelia. Her father, Grand Duke Leopold, sat at the far end of the table. He was Chairman Emeritus, a title he'd invented, which, he claimed, meant he could attend all the meetings and do none of the work. He watched his daughter, a profound, overwhelming pride in his eyes. He had unleashed her. He had watched her turn a humiliating personal wound into a global strategic victory. She was, he knew, a far better leader than he had ever been. The meeting adjourned. Amelia walked slowly from the boardroom to her private adjoining chambers. It was not a palace, but a sleek, modern apartment. A nursery, an office, and a bedroom. Her assistant, a sharp Swiss woman named Elara, was waiting. Your Highness, Elara said, offering a tablet and a single thick envelope. This just arrived from the legal department. Amelia looked at the envelope, the Geneva postmark. She knew what it was. And, Elara said, this. She held up the new Time magazine. Amelia looked at the cover. The Princess CEO. She let out a small, dry laugh. They still don't get it, do they? They are still so obsessed with the title. It is a powerful image, Ma'am. It is a distraction, Amelia said, though she took it. She sat in a comfortable chair overlooking the lake. She ignored the magazine and took the envelope. She opened it. The final decree. Dissolution. A single word on a single page that undid 3 years of her life. She had expected to feel something. Triumph, anger, regret. Instead, she felt a profound, quiet click, like a heavy locked door swinging open. It was the sound of her past moving into its proper place. She picked up a pen and signed the final acknowledgement paper. Amelia Duval Altenburg. She was not a wife. She was not a victim. The princess was a role she played for the public, just as Amy the Mouse had been a role she'd played for Julian. They were costumes. She stood, holding the signed paper, and walked to the nursery. The room was simple, elegant, and filled with books on science, art, and history. She placed her hand on her stomach, feeling a strong, impatient kick. She thought of Julian in his rented room, shouting into a void. She thought of Isabella in her grey cubicle, burning with bitter ambition. They were tragic figures, trapped in the past, obsessed with what they had lost. Amelia looked out at the mountains. She was not looking back. She was looking forward. He thought I was his dead weight, she whispered to her unborn child. He forgot. Weight is just another word for gravity. And gravity holds the whole world in place. She put the divorce decree down on her desk, beside the blueprints for the new AGI US headquarters. She was done being a wife, and she was done being a secret. It was time to rule. In the end, Julian Thorne wasn't destroyed by a global corporation or a powerful duke. He was destroyed by his own arrogance. He had the world in his hands, a brilliant, powerful, and loyal partner, but he was so blinded by his own reflection, he couldn't see her. He mistook her silence for weakness. He mistook her kindness for stupidity. He learned, too late, that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. Amelia didn't just take back her company. She took back her life, and she built an empire on the ashes of his ego. What did you think of this story? Do you believe in karma? Let me know in the comments below what you thought of Julian's downfall and Amelia's ultimate power move. If you loved this drama, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see a story of justice served, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories every single week. We see you and we appreciate you. Thanks for watching.